Jack's eyes fluttered open, the dark emptiness of space looming outside the station's broken windows. The cold metal walls hummed faintly, but the silence was deafening. His head throbbed from the impact of the crash, and his body ached as he struggled to sit up. The last thing he remembered was the mission. He was part of a crew assigned to fix a malfunctioning alien space station. That was before everything went wrong. The crash had torn through the station's outer hull, and now it was nothing more than a skeleton of its former self. The corridors were dark, lights flickering weakly. Power was failing, and Jack knew that it was only a matter of time before everything completely shut down. He stood up carefully, shaking off the dizziness that threatened to pull him back into unconsciousness. His heart pounded in his chest as he glanced around. The emergency lighting cast long shadows down the hallways, but the silence made everything feel wrong. Jack wasn't sure if it was the empty corridors or the strange sense that he was being watched, but his instincts were on high alert. His crew was gone. No one had been around when the station started to fall apart. The others had abandoned him. His heart sank at the realization. He was completely alone. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small communicator. It flickered, then died almost immediately. The power was too low. He had no way of reaching help, no way to signal anyone. And with the station's power grid slowly failing, even the life support systems would soon be shutting down. The only choice was to find a way to fix it himself. If he didn't, this place would be his tomb. A sudden feeling of claustrophobia settled over him as the walls seemed to close in, but he pushed the feeling aside. He couldn't afford to panic. Jack wasn't a stranger to danger, but this was different. He had faced tough situations before, but he had always had backup. Now, there was no one. Just him and the station's failing systems. His eyes fell on the maintenance hatch beside him. He had to get to the station's core, where the power systems were regulated. Maybe, just maybe, he could get the systems back online. He didn't know what kind of alien tech the station used, but he had studied some of it before. He had the knowledge, the tools, but would it be enough? The air was growing colder, and Jack knew he couldn't waste any more time. He had to act now. Cautiously, Jack approached the hatch. His fingers brushed against the surface, and he felt a slight vibration underneath, a sign that the station's damaged systems were still active, though barely. He twisted the handle and pulled the hatch open with a hiss. Inside was a small space full of cables, wires, and alien machinery that he had never fully understood. This wasn't the kind of tech he was used to fixing, but he had no choice. Inside the cramped room, the stench of burnt electronics filled the air. Jack's heart raced as he quickly began to assess the damage. The circuits were fried in several places, and the cooling systems for the core were barely functioning. If he didn't get it repaired soon, the temperature would drop too low, and the life support systems would fail completely. But he couldn't afford to panic. Taking a deep breath, Jack grabbed his toolkit and started working. He had no idea if it would work, but he had to try. Hours passed as he worked tirelessly, his hands moving automatically as he focused on fixing the critical systems. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his muscles ached from the strain of working in such a small space. The station groaned and shifted beneath him, and the constant low hum of malfunctioning systems was starting to get to him. His mind was starting to play tricks. He could have sworn he heard footsteps echoing down the corridor, but when he looked, there was nothing there. Jack wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and glanced at the timer on his wrist. He had been working for over 6 hours straight, and the station's systems were no closer to being repaired. Time was running out. Suddenly, the lights above him flickered and then went out entirely. The room plunged into darkness. His heart skipped a beat. The low hum that had been there before was gone, replaced by a thick, oppressive silence. Jack could feel his pulse in his temples as he scrambled for his flashlight. When the beam finally came to life, it cut through the darkness, but the silence that followed felt deafening. He stepped out of the cramped maintenance room, his flashlight beam sweeping over the darkened hallways. A soft thud echoed from somewhere deeper inside the station. Jack froze. His breath caught in his throat. He wasn't alone. The station was supposed to be empty. At least, that's what he thought. The crash had left only a handful of survivors, and they were long gone. But now, the eerie sound of movement in the distance sent a chill through his spine. Who or what could still be here? He gripped his flashlight tightly, his mind racing. Could it be another crew member who had been trapped like him? Or had something else survived the crash? The air around him seemed to grow colder, and Jack's senses were on high alert. He didn't have the luxury of fear. He had to stay focused. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but he couldn't afford to be caught off guard. Every second was precious. As he crept toward the source of the noise, his mind raced through possibilities. The station was abandoned, or so he had believed. But now, something, or someone, was moving through the wreckage. The tension in the air was palpable. Jack's hand hovered over his makeshift weapon, a small plasma cutter that was designed for repairs, not combat. But he knew it was the only thing he had to defend himself. If whatever or whoever was out there wasn't friendly, he was in serious trouble. But Jack wasn't going down without a fight. He steeled himself, pushing forward, ready to face whatever the station had in store. The unknown stretched out before him, and his journey through the void had only just begun. The station groaned again, and Jack felt a flicker of hope. He was still alive, and as long as he had breath in his lungs, he would find a way to survive, no matter the cost. The silence that had swallowed the station felt unnerving, suffocating, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Each footstep echoed in the empty halls, and the eerie quiet of the abandoned station only seemed to grow more oppressive as he moved deeper into the wreckage. His flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long, wavering shadows against the metal walls. He tried to steady his breath and keep his mind clear. He needed to focus. He couldn't afford to panic. There had been a crash. Systems were failing, and he was alone. But as he ventured further, the strange noise he had heard earlier seemed to follow him. It wasn't footsteps exactly, but a soft scrape, as if something, or someone, was moving carefully in the dark, always just out of his reach. Jack's heartbeat quickened, and he gripped the plasma cutter more tightly. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. As he passed through a narrow corridor, he paused at an intersection. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He wasn't alone. He could feel it. The air around him felt charged, almost as if something was waiting in the shadows, observing his every move. A soft noise, like something shifting in the darkness, caught his attention. He snapped his head toward the sound. The shadows moved, but they weren't moving like a person would. It was different. Fluid, almost. It wasn't the type of movement he was used to, and Jack's pulse raced. His eyes narrowed, scanning the area with the flashlight beam. Nothing was there, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. The sound came again, this time louder. It was unmistakable. Something, or someone, was hiding in the darkness, moving just outside his field of vision. It wasn't human. Jack was sure of that. The way it moved was wrong. Jack's thoughts raced. Could it be another alien species that the station's crew had been working with, or had something more dangerous survived the crash? The station had been under construction for years, but Jack had never known of anything dangerous hiding inside. He had to find out what it was, but he couldn't just rush in blindly. He needed a plan, and more importantly, he needed information. Jack crept forward, his eyes darting to every corner, every dark crevice. His flashlight flickered briefly, and he quickly adjusted the settings to its highest intensity. The beam grew stronger, casting even longer shadows in the narrow passageways ahead of him. Another sound. This time, it was closer. His heart skipped a beat, the scrape of claws against metal. He froze, listening intently. It was followed by a low growl, low enough to make his skin crawl. Jack's grip on the plasma cutter tightened, his mind racing. Then, just as quickly as the noise had appeared, it stopped. Dead silence. For a long moment, Jack didn't move. He was still, holding his breath, trying to figure out what was going on. But there was no more sound. No movement. Jack's muscles were tensed, his body coiled like a spring. Every instinct was telling him to get out of there, to retreat, but his curiosity pushed him forward. He had to know what was out there. If it was dangerous, he had to deal with it. But if it was another survivor, he needed to know how they had survived. And maybe, just maybe, they could help him get the station back online. He moved slowly, quietly, down the corridor. His flashlight swept over the walls, now dusted with debris from the crash. The dim lights overhead flickered sporadically, casting an eerie glow over everything. The faint sound of his boots against the metal floor was the only thing that kept him grounded in reality. At the end of the hall, the shadows seemed to deepen. Jack stopped, the tension thick in the air. He couldn't go back now. The unknown, whatever it was, had to be confronted. He stepped forward, the light from his flashlight cutting through the darkness. It illuminated the wreckage ahead of him. Walls crumpled and torn, equipment scattered across the floor. But there, standing in the shadow of the ruined console, was something Jack had never expected. It was huge, larger than any human being. Its body was covered in a dark, scaled armor, shimmering slightly in the faint light. Its eyes glowed, reflecting the beam from his flashlight with an unnatural intensity. The alien creature stood motionless, as if studying him. And then it made a sound, a low, gurgling growl that rattled the very bones of the station. Jack's heart thudded in his chest, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The creature didn't move closer, but it didn't retreat either. It just stared, its breathing deep and steady. This was no ordinary predator. This was something else entirely. For the briefest moment, Jack considered running. But his curiosity, his need to understand what was happening, kept him rooted to the spot. The creature, whatever it was, wasn't acting the way a predator should. It wasn't attacking. Instead, it just watched him, studied him as if it knew he wasn't a threat. Jack swallowed, his throat dry. What did this creature want? Why wasn't it attacking? He took a step forward, carefully. The creature's eyes locked on him, unblinking, unflinching. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears, but he had to know. He couldn't just stand there, unsure. He spoke softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing. Then, to his surprise, the creature responded. Not with words, but with a movement. It stepped back, revealing a small bundle in its arms, a bundle that Jack could barely make out. His eyes widened as he saw it more clearly. In the creature's arms were several small, helpless beings, alien cubs. The creature had been protecting them. The meaning of the situation hit Jack like a ton of bricks. He wasn't alone here anymore. And the creature in front of him was not the enemy. It was a protector. Jack took a tentative step forward, unsure of what to do next. This was a moment of choice. He could fight, or he could try to protect them both. The station groaned again, and Jack felt the weight of his decision hanging in the air. His next move could determine not only his fate, but the future of these innocent creatures. The tension in the air was palpable. The unknown stretched out before him, and Jack knew that his fight for survival had just taken an unexpected turn. The air was thick with tension, and Jack could feel every muscle in his body locked in place, as though his very existence hung on the next few moments. The creature's glowing eyes never left him, its steady breathing the only sound that filled the room. The alien cubs in its arms, small and defenseless, squirmed slightly, but their protector held them gently, as though trying to shield them from any harm. Jack was still processing the scene unfolding before him. He had expected a fight, some violent, monstrous alien that would see him as nothing more than prey. Instead, here he was, face to face with a being that could crush him in an instant, but was instead offering him a strange kind of protection. The atmosphere felt surreal. Jack felt his pulse slowly return to a more manageable rhythm, though it was still rapid, quick with adrenaline. He had to think. He couldn't let fear rule him now. And now Jack had to decide. Would he rise to the challenge? Would he protect the cubs and find a way to save both them and himself? With the creature's eyes locked on his, Jack made a silent vow. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to make sure the cubs survived, too. This strange alliance had begun, and he would see it through, no matter what it took. The creature seemed to sense his hesitation, for it moved a little, adjusting the cubs in its arms. With a low, clicking sound, it made another gesture toward Jack. It wasn't hostile. In fact, it felt almost pleading. Jack squinted, trying to make sense of its behavior. Was it communicating? Was it asking for something? Jack carefully lowered his plasma cutter, though he kept a firm grip on it. The weapon might not have been useful for conversation, but it was his only means of defense if things took a turn. But he didn't think this would turn violent. At least not yet. He took a cautious step forward. "What do you want from me?" Jack asked, his voice shaky but firm. He couldn't believe he was asking that question. He had no idea if the creature understood him, but the last thing he wanted to do was show fear. Not now. Not in front of this beast. To his surprise, the alien lowered its head slightly, as if contemplating the question. The cubs, nestled in its arms, began to chirp softly. Jack could see the bond between them. The creature wasn't a mindless monster. It had a purpose, a duty to protect the cubs. Jack thought for a moment, then slowly sat down on the ground, placing his weapon beside him to show that he wasn't a threat. He couldn't pretend that he wasn't scared, but if he wanted answers, he had to make this creature understand that he wasn't here to fight. The space station felt far too isolated for Jack to rely solely on violence to resolve this. He needed information, and he needed to find a way to survive. The creature's eyes never left him, but it seemed to recognize his action. It tilted its head, the gesture almost human in its curiosity. With one swift motion, it lowered itself to the floor in front of him, the cub still safe within its grasp. For several seconds, Jack and the creature sat in silence. There was an unspoken understanding between them. The tension that had gripped Jack began to dissipate. He wasn't sure if it was because the creature wasn't attacking, or because it was the first time since the crash that he hadn't felt utterly alone. He had been abandoned, left to die. Now he had found a strange, unlikely companion in the depths of space. Jack hesitated, then asked, "Why haven't you attacked me?" The creature's eyes flickered, its expression unreadable. It seemed to pause, as though trying to comprehend his question. Jack was beginning to think that the creature didn't know how to communicate in the way humans did. But that didn't matter right now. What mattered was finding a way to survive. And that meant understanding this being. Slowly, the creature's low growl rumbled in the air. And then, without warning, it placed one of the cubs on the floor beside Jack. The little alien looked up at him with large, curious eyes, completely unafraid. It waddled a bit closer, as if to inspect him. Jack froze. Was it testing him? Could it be offering a sign of trust? The creature's posture seemed to soften. It slowly reached down and lifted another cub, offering it to Jack as though presenting it to him. Jack's heart pounded. This was a gesture, an offering. The creature wasn't hostile. It was entrusting him with something precious. Jack swallowed hard. He had no idea what this all meant. But one thing was clear. This was more than just an encounter with an alien. This was an opportunity. An unexpected alliance. The creature was offering him a chance to prove himself worthy of its trust, of the trust of these cubs. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he couldn't turn away from this moment. This was no longer just about survival. It was about something deeper, something bigger. His thoughts were interrupted as the cub approached him, sniffing his boot cautiously before looking back at its protector. The creature's eyes softened once more, the flicker of what could only be described as understanding crossing its features. Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. He had no idea what was happening, but he felt an undeniable pull to protect these cubs as well. He slowly reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he gently petted the small alien. It was warm to the touch, the fur soft beneath his fingertips. He had never felt anything like it before. It was unlike anything he had ever known, yet it felt right. The creature was not just protecting its young. It was seeking an ally. And Jack was the only one here. The creature's growl softened into a low hum, almost as if it were content. Jack looked up, meeting its eyes again. His heart beat a little faster. The air was thick with the understanding that whatever happened next would define both their fates. The next step was his. Jack had been abandoned by his team, left alone to die. But now, against all odds, he wasn't alone. The creature had given him a chance. The quiet hum of the station reverberated in the background as Jack, still kneeling on the cold metal floor, remained locked in the creature's gaze. He could feel the weight of its silent watchfulness, its presence both intimidating and oddly reassuring. The cubs, now settled comfortably near him, looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. They seemed at peace, their small forms twitching occasionally as they investigated their new surroundings. Jack exhaled slowly, trying to make sense of the situation. His mind raced. He was on a station light years away from Earth, with no way to communicate with his crew or get any form of help. But here, in front of him, was this alien, a beast that could easily crush him, yet it wasn't attacking. It was waiting for something. He reached down to gently scratch the back of one of the cubs, the soft fur moving under his fingertips. The creature made a low, vibrating sound, almost like a purr, though far more guttural. Was it approval? Cautiously, Jack glanced back up at the larger alien, noting the lack of aggression in its posture. It had made no move to harm him so far, and had even placed its vulnerable offspring in his proximity. There was no question about it now. This wasn't just about survival. This was about a chance for something more. Jack couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had been left behind, abandoned to die. But somehow, this creature had chosen him, or perhaps had been forced to trust him. Either way, he had to prove himself. To survive, but also to protect. There was no going back now. "I don't know what you want from me," Jack muttered under his breath, more to himself than the alien. The creature's unblinking stare felt heavy on him, but there was something in those eyes, something not hostile, that made Jack's gut tell him the truth. It wasn't expecting violence. It was expecting him to act. The cubs, small and seemingly harmless, continued to shuffle around the floor near Jack. He could hear the faintest sound of them playing, a kind of soft chittering noise that reminded him of his own pets back home on Earth. But there was a difference. These were not just simple creatures. These were the offspring of a predator, a creature so powerful that even a small mistake on Jack's part could mean death. Yet here they were, placing their trust in him. Or at least, that's what it felt like. But Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement. The larger alien shifted, its body language speaking volumes. It was preparing to move. The creature's claws, sharp and lethal-looking, twitched, the metallic surface of the station reflecting the danger of their length. Jack held his breath. What was it going to do now? To his surprise, the creature didn't move to attack. Instead, it slowly turned and began walking towards one of the control panels in the corner of the room. The cubs, seemingly used to this behavior, followed, moving in tandem with their protector. They reached the panel, and the creature pressed a set of strange, elongated fingers against a series of glowing buttons. Jack watched carefully, trying to figure out what was going on. The station's systems were still up and running, at least partially, though Jack had no idea how much of it was still functional. What was this creature doing? A series of soft peeps echoed through the room As the alien interacted with the controls, its movements precise and methodical. Jack stood up slowly, unsure of whether to approach or stay put. Was it trying to communicate? Could it understand the systems here? Tentatively, Jack made his way closer, his boots making little sound on the metal floor. He stood at a safe distance from the creature and watched. He couldn't let himself be too close. This alien was far more dangerous than any being he'd ever encountered. But there was no denying that something was happening here. He had a feeling that if he understood what the creature was doing, he might unlock the key to surviving this station. The cubs, meanwhile, seemed less concerned about the interaction between their protector and the panel. They kept chittering and nudging Jack's legs, trying to play. The strange bond they shared was undeniable. After a few moments, the creature turned to face Jack again. It looked him up and down, then made a subtle motion with its head, as though gesturing for Jack to approach. For a heartbeat, Jack hesitated. Could he trust this alien? Could he really approach, knowing that it was capable of ripping him apart if it chose to? But there was no time for hesitation. Jack had been alone on this station for too long to waste an opportunity. He stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, but with purpose. As he reached the control panel, the creature moved aside, giving Jack a clear view of the glowing symbols and panels. The creature's large eyes watched him carefully, and for the first time, Jack realized that this was more than just a creature he needed to survive. It was guiding him. The alien had no reason to do this unless it had some goal. Was it trying to communicate, or was it showing Jack how to use the systems to survive? Jack pressed a button, one that looked familiar to the one he had seen earlier when he had tried to fix the station. To his surprise, the station's lighting flickered to life. The lights that had been dim and fading suddenly illuminated, casting a new light on the walls. The creature rumbled softly in what could only be interpreted as satisfaction. Jack looked back at it, his mind racing. Had he done it? Had he just repaired the station's power systems, even if just partially? The reality was starting to set in. This creature wasn't just protecting its cubs. It was helping him, guiding him through the most crucial part of survival on this station. As Jack stood there, looking at the alien and its cubs, something became abundantly clear. The odds were against him. He was stranded, alone, but in some strange twist of fate, he was no longer helpless. He had an unlikely ally now, and together, they might just survive this. The creature let out another soft purr, a sound that Jack wasn't sure he would ever forget. This, he realized, was just the beginning. And the future, whatever it held, would depend on the decisions they made now. The glow of the control panel bathed the room in soft, pulsing light. The alien, standing silently beside Jack, observed him with an almost unsettling calm. Its eyes, those dark, reflective orbs, seemed to hold an entire universe of knowledge and mystery, making Jack feel as though he was standing in the presence of something far beyond his comprehension. But for the first time since he'd been abandoned on the station, Jack felt a strange sense of connection. Despite the tension, despite the weight of fear that had plagued him since his arrival, there was something comforting about the creature's presence. It had chosen not to kill him. It had, in fact, actively helped him with the station's systems. This wasn't just an alien. This was an ally. Jack's fingers hovered over the control panel, still uncertain about how much he could trust the system or the creature beside him. The alien had done its part, showing him how to restore the station's power. But now, with the station slowly coming back to life, Jack's mind began to spin with the possibilities. Could he escape this place? Could he find a way to communicate with his crew? Or was he destined to remain trapped here, relying on the whims of a creature that was still, in many ways, an enigma? The cubs, oblivious to the tension, had already resumed their playful antics. They chased each other in circles around the room, their small bodies darting from one corner to another. Their innocent laughter-like chittering filled the room, a stark contrast to the heavier thoughts swirling in Jack's mind. Despite everything, they were at peace here, in the heart of a deadly station, with a dangerous creature as their protector. Jack shifted his focus back to the creature, its eyes still fixed on him, observing his every move. It was waiting for him to act, waiting for him to make a decision. The pressure to perform, whether it was a test or simply a matter of survival, weighed heavily on Jack's shoulders. He reached out and pressed another button on the panel. This time, it wasn't to restore the power, but to access the comms system. A low hum filled the air, and for a brief moment, Jack felt the familiar twinge of hope rise in his chest. Could it be? Was he going to make contact with someone? Anyone who could help him? The screen flickered for a moment before a series of alien symbols began to appear. Jack frowned, confused. It was a language he couldn't understand. And the more he tried to decode the symbols, the more he realized that the station's communications were beyond anything Earth's engineers had ever encountered. Yet the creature beside him didn't seem alarmed. It stood quietly, watching Jack, as if it were waiting for him to make the next move. There was a low growl in the back of the creature's throat, a rumbling sound that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck stand up. He turned toward the alien. Its posture was alert, its ears pricked, its gaze fixed on the doorway. Suddenly, the station's atmosphere shifted. Jack felt it, a low, thrumming vibration that ran through the walls of the station. The lights flickered again, this time more erratically, casting strange shadows that danced across the walls. The temperature seemed to drop slightly, and Jack instinctively pulled his jacket tighter around his body. The creature's body tensed. The cubs, sensing the shift in the air, stopped their play and huddled close to their protector. Jack could see it now clearly. The alien was no longer just observing. It was on high alert. A soft, mechanical sound echoed from the station's depths. A door slid open somewhere far down the corridor. Jack's heart rate quickened. He wasn't alone on this station. There were others. The creature growled once more, a low, threatening sound that filled the room. It positioned itself between Jack and the door, shielding the cubs with its massive form. The message was clear. It was ready to defend its young. Jack had no doubt now that whatever was out there in the dark depths of the station, it wasn't a friendly visitor. The hum of machinery grew louder as footsteps approached. Footsteps that were too heavy, too deliberate to belong to anything but another predator. Jack's breath hitched in his throat. Could this be the rescue team he hoped for? Or was it something worse, something that had come to finish the job the aliens had started? The alien made a sharp motion with its head, signaling Jack to stay quiet and out of sight. Its body was low to the ground now, its claws extending, ready to strike. The cubs nestled deeper into the corners, their wide eyes reflecting the same fear Jack felt. Jack's mind raced. He wasn't prepared for this. His heart pounded in his chest, and for a moment, he felt completely helpless. The alien had spared him, had helped him repair the station. But now he was unsure of what would happen next. The footsteps were getting closer, and Jack's instincts screamed at him to run, to hide, to get away from whatever was coming. But he couldn't leave the cubs. He couldn't abandon the creature that had shown him more kindness than he ever expected from an alien species. He swallowed hard and steadied his breath. There was no turning back. Whatever was coming, Jack had to face it. He had no choice. With the alien by his side and the cubs huddled close, Jack stood tall and prepared himself for whatever awaited them beyond the door. This was it. Whatever happened next would decide everything. The door slid open, and Jack wasn't sure whether the station was about to be his grave or the battleground for his survival. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, the low light from the corridor spilling into the room. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Time hung in the balance as Jack and the creature shared a tense, silent understanding. The cubs, still huddled in the corner, seemed to sense the growing danger, their bodies pressed tightly together, eyes wide and alert. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. His eyes quickly scanned the room for any escape routes. There were none. He was trapped in this chamber, the only source of hope being the massive alien by his side. Then the first shadow appeared in the doorway. The silhouette was tall, humanoid in shape, but it exuded an unmistakable aura of malice. The creature entering the room was a soldier, armed and ready for combat. Jack's breath caught in his throat. The uniform it wore was unmistakably military, a sign that it had come prepared for something, perhaps a confrontation. The fact that it didn't seem surprised to find him here made it all the more chilling. This was no accidental encounter. The alien beside Jack growled low in its throat, its eyes narrowing, every muscle in its massive body taut with readiness. It slowly shifted its weight, preparing itself to strike. Jack could feel the tension in the air. He knew it wouldn't hesitate. "Stay behind me," the alien rumbled, its voice like gravel, deeper than anything Jack had ever heard before. Jack barely had time to nod before the soldier stepped forward, its eyes scanning the room. It froze for a split second as it locked eyes with Jack, but then the creature's gaze shifted to the alien, the real threat in the room. It raised a hand, signaling for Jack to remain still, as though expecting the alien to make the first move. A crackling sound followed, the hum of a plasma gun charging. The soldier's weapon was aimed directly at the alien. Jack's heart leaped into his throat. This wasn't just any soldier, it was a predator, a hunter. It had no intention of negotiating or sparing anyone. It came for the kill. Without warning, the soldier fired. A brilliant burst of blue energy shot toward the alien, but it was too fast. The creature moved with a speed that was almost beyond comprehension. The blast hit nothing but air, and in the same instant, the alien lunged. The force of its charge was so immense that the soldier barely had time to react. The alien knocked the weapon from its hands with a single swipe, sending it clattering across the floor. A low growl escaped the alien's throat as it pressed the soldier to the ground, its powerful claws digging into the soldier's armor, keeping it immobilized. Jack, frozen with fear, couldn't take his eyes off the scene. The alien was terrifying, a force of nature. It didn't just fight, it dominated. But the soldier wasn't giving up. It struggled, its legs kicking and its hands pushing against the alien's massive arms. It tried to reach for a blade strapped to its side, but the alien's grip tightened, rendering the soldier's attempts useless. "You're out of your league," the alien growled, its voice cold and commanding. The words were directed at the soldier, but Jack couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. This creature wasn't just defending itself, it was claiming control of the situation, establishing dominance. The soldier's efforts weakened as the alien continued to hold it down. Jack watched in awe and fear as the soldier's resistance slowly turned to submission. The power of the alien was undeniable. The cubs, still tucked safely in the corner, were silent now. They knew something dangerous was happening. The room was heavy with tension, every heartbeat echoing in the silence that followed the clash. And then, as if in response to the alien's command, the soldier stopped moving. The alien stepped back, releasing its grip on the soldier and letting it collapse to the ground. It stood tall, watching the creature with calculating eyes. The soldier was no longer a threat. It had been neutralized, and with a single move, the alien had shown Jack what true power was. For a long moment, there was no sound except the low hum of the station's failing systems. Jack dared not speak. He was unsure whether the alien was finished, whether the soldier had been subdued for good. But then the alien turned to Jack, its eyes softening, as if it had returned to its original purpose. Its posture relaxed, and it spoke, though this time, its voice wasn't as cold as before. "We need to leave now," it said, its tone firm, but not unkind. "There are more of them out there." Jack nodded quickly, his mind still reeling from the unexpected confrontation. He knew that they couldn't stay here much longer. The soldier had been a scout, but the others would be coming. There was no doubt about that. The alien turned toward the back of the room, its claws clicking on the metal floor as it moved toward the far door. The cubs, sensing their protector's movements, followed closely behind, not daring to leave the creature's side. Jack hesitated for a moment, looking back at the soldier, who now lay motionless on the floor. Was it dead? Was it just knocked out? He didn't have time to figure it out. The alien had already made its decision. "Come on," the alien urged, its eyes scanning the dark corridor beyond the door. "We can't waste time." Jack snapped out of his thoughts and rushed to follow. He knew there was no turning back now. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. The alien had saved him once, but now, Jack realized, it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper. They were in this fight together, and for the first time since he had been abandoned on this station, Jack felt that he wasn't truly alone. Together, they might stand a chance. But how much longer could they keep running? The unknown loomed ahead, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The hum of the failing station seemed louder now, as if the walls themselves were groaning under the weight of their impending collapse. Jack could feel his heart beating faster, each step echoing in the dark corridor as he followed the alien. His mind raced. He had no idea where they were going, but it didn't matter. They were running out of time. The alien moved with an unnatural grace, its massive body cutting through the dim light of the station like a shadow. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, darted back and forth, scanning for threats. Jack tried to keep up, but the alien's speed was something he could barely match. Every so often, it would glance over its shoulder, ensuring he was still following. "We have to reach the main engine room," the alien said, its voice urgent. "That's our only chance to stop this place from blowing itself apart." Jack didn't ask how the alien knew so much about the station. At this point, it didn't matter. They were running on instinct now, and Jack was willing to trust the alien, his only chance for survival. The corridor twisted and turned, a maze of metallic walls and shattered panels. The station had clearly seen better days. The lights flickered, and the hum of malfunctioning machinery seemed to add to the tension. Jack could hear the distant sounds of footsteps behind them, but he didn't dare look back. He knew what that meant. They weren't alone. The alien stopped abruptly in front of a large, sealed door. It was a reinforced blast door, designed to withstand the worst of what this station could throw at it. The alien approached it with calm precision, tapping a series of symbols on a small control panel beside the door. Jack had no idea what the symbols meant, but the alien seemed certain. It worked quickly, fingers moving with speed and purpose, until with a loud hiss, the door slid open. A blast of cold air washed over them as the chamber beyond was revealed. The main engine room was vast, its walls lined with massive humming machinery. Pipes and conduits ran along the floor and ceiling, many of them cracked and leaking strange liquids. The room was a chaotic mix of power and destruction, and Jack could feel the energy pulsating in the air. They were close, too close. The alien stepped inside first, its senses alert. Jack hesitated, stepping through the door, eyes wide as he took in the sheer size of the room. But he didn't have time to admire the sight. He could hear the footsteps growing louder, closer. "Move," the alien barked, and Jack instinctively obeyed. They sprinted deeper into the room, making their way to a control console in the center of the chamber. The alien's hands flew across the controls, muttering in a language Jack couldn't understand. But it didn't seem to matter. Every touch seemed to trigger something. A system coming online, a door closing, a barrier sealing off another part of the station. Jack glanced around, his nerves on edge. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence felt too thick. It was as if the whole station was holding its breath, waiting for something. He had a sinking feeling in his gut. They were running out of time. "Is this going to work?" Jack asked, his voice strained. The alien didn't answer at first, its focus solely on the console in front of it. Then, after a tense moment, it spoke. Only one way to find out. A loud beep echoed through the room as the console lit up with a series of red warning lights. Jack's eyes widened. "What's happening?" "We've triggered the fail-safe," the alien explained. "The station is about to self-destruct." But I can override the system and reset the core. It will buy us enough time to escape. Jack's mind raced. The station was going to explode. They weren't just running from aliens anymore. They were running from an entire space station about to turn into a massive bomb. His stomach turned as he realized the gravity of their situation. But there was no turning back now. The alien worked faster, its claws flying across the controls, manipulating the system in ways Jack could barely comprehend. The beeping grew louder, more urgent, and Jack could feel the sweat forming on his brow. The countdown had already begun, but they were still in the heart of the station. "Can you hurry it up?" Jack shouted, his voice a mixture of fear and desperation. The alien shot him a glance, its eyes glowing brighter with intensity. "I'm doing the best I can, but if we don't make it out in time..." Jack didn't need the alien to finish the sentence. They had no time to waste. They had to get to the escape pods. Now, with one final press of a button, the console flashed green, signaling that the system had been overridden. The alien turned to Jack, a rare flicker of relief crossing its face. "Let's go," it said, its voice low and determined. They sprinted back toward the door, but as they reached it, a loud crash echoed from the far side of the room. Jack froze. He wasn't sure what he'd heard, but it didn't sound good. "We're not alone," the alien hissed, its eyes narrowing. Before Jack could react, the door exploded inward, a wave of smoke and debris engulfing the room. Out of the haze, two more soldiers stepped into view, their weapons aimed directly at the alien. "Run," the alien ordered, and Jack didn't hesitate. They dashed for the exit, but the soldiers were faster. One of them fired a warning shot, narrowly missing them. The sound of blaster fire rang in Jack's ears as they bolted through the labyrinth of pipes and machines, the countdown in the background growing louder with each passing second. The station wasn't just a prison. It was a tomb. And unless they escaped soon, it would take them both with it.